Welcome to Career Candour, the podcast where we get real about the twists, turns, and triumphs of building a meaningful career. Today's guest is someone who has not only led billion-dollar businesses across Asia, but also redefined what transformation truly means. Terry O'Connor is a customer-centric CEO, board member, advisor, and an OBE award recipient. But beyond the accolades, he's a leader known for building resilient teams, shaping bold strategies, and delivering real impact. From reinventing retail giants like Courts and Matahari to advising digital disruptors and mentoring the next generation of leaders, Terry's journey is rich with insight and packed with lessons for anyone looking to grow, pivot, or lead with purpose. So whether you're just starting out, navigating a big shift, or dreaming big, this episode is for you. Terry, welcome to Career Candour.
Thank you, Lane. Very happy to be here.
So I want to start off with a question, Terry. I love digging into origin stories and what makes people tick in terms of how they got to where they are today. So you've had a truly global and multifaceted career. It's took you from Liverpool to Singapore, from traditional retail to digital transformation. What drew you into retail in the first place?
Well, look, as you probably can tell from sports programs or music programs, Liverpool people are very social. My first job was in a shipping company. Liverpool's got a maritime heritage, but that was quite monotonous and a bit lonely, and so the nature of the work wasn't engaged with lots of people, etc. So I was quite bored. And then I saw an advertisement for a trainee buyer role at a Liverpool-based retailer that was expanding across the north of England, Colourvision PLC, and buying or negotiating, seemed to me to be okay, facing suppliers, talking terms, retail stores and staff. And so the whole thing felt a bit more entrepreneurial, a bit more social, and appealed. And so I applied for that role and I got it. And to be honest, it paid less than I was already earning. I didn't even ask. I wanted it that much.
Interesting. I've had a few conversations, and one of the things that I've noticed from people when they've made a shift or they've been strategic to enter a certain industry, there's often a bit of short-term pain for long-term gain. So I'm curious, you made that sacrifice, Terry, initially. What did those early years teach you that you still carry with you today?
I think the importance in retail, and this would transfer to hospitality, to food and beverage, to any human-centric industry, is connecting with the shop floor. It's making sure that you understand the business from the ground up. I did retail buying by day. I think on Thursday evenings, I worked on the shop floor myself. So I was selling consumer electronics directly to the customer, helping customers with customer service. Helping them with rental options, payment options, and really getting to know every aspect of the business. Myself, I was out around other retail sites and competitors across the weekend. I was taking phone calls with customers myself. And so, whatever industry you find yourself in as a young professional, it's just important to really sort of understand it from the ground up.
And I know you shared the story about Colourvision with me before, um, but looking back, was there a defining moment where you felt your career took a major step forward? Maybe a risk that paid off, or a role that changed how you thought as a leader?
Well, the big deal about Colourvision was that it was a small business, right? It was 7 stores when I joined. When I left to come to Asia, we had 95 stores or so. And throughout that sort of 7-year journey, I was blessed to have a direct line into the chairman and founder of the company, which came by the misfortune of my direct boss having a medical issue or a couple of times being on long-term leave, and having to step in. I mean, I had a chaperone from the board, but his main role was sort of property and real estate, leases, that sort of thing. And so I was pretty much left to do the buying at a super young age. I mean, I was 21 years old when Neville Michelson made me his buying director, with tens of millions of pounds of buying budget, and so the I've always retained that if somebody is good enough, they're old enough. I mean, I've always sort of when people are ready, they're ready. It doesn't matter whether that job was previously taken by a 35-year-old or a 45-year-old. If the 25-year-old is capable, it's fine. And then equally at the other end of the spectrum, if you're still on top of your game at 65, well, good for you, and so I think a couple of things, it kind of really knocked ageism at all levels out of my thinking. It made me really value meritocracy, and giving people the opportunity and the breakthrough in their own careers. And even to this day, I mean, I take responsibility for people that have been on my team. So the phrase I use is, once you've been on my team, you're always on my team. And so, if you need a reference, if you need a contact, if you need a door opening, it's forever.
Hmm. Interesting. I mean, from the conversations that I've been having, what I've found is that leadership spans both experience, but also you can't avoid personal values getting involved. Are there any personal values or habits that have remained constant throughout your career evolution?
Well, actually, it's funny you should say that. I actually did a values exercise as part of a retreat last week, where we put a whole list of words together that resonated, and then we had to sort of we had to put them into blocks, and then sort of essentially come up with a title for that block. So I'll tell you exactly what mine are. They're learning, inspiring others, play, relationships, and kindness. And I guess that's where I'm very much involved in an organization called YPO, Young Presidents Organization, which is the shared DNA of committing to lifelong learning.
Mm,
I've always worked on that mantra of work hard, play hard, and had sort of social time with my teams, making sure
mm,
that they bond not just as colleagues, but they bond as friends wherever possible, because ultimately people will move jobs and companies for pay, um, unless there's a higher bar than pay, and the higher bar than pay is generally inspiring leaders and social connections at work. I mean, those two things come above pay, generally in most aspiring executives thought process. If they feel that work is not just a place to go and do functional things, and if they feel they're learning from people, you know, above them in the org structure, alongside them, and maybe even people that are young and have got skills that we don't.
and for those that are listening but maybe don't understand or haven't come across YPO before, can you shed some light on what YPO is?
Yeah, well, obviously, I'm not that young anymore, but YPO is Young Presidents Organization, and the shared DNA of YPO members is that we became CEOs or equivalent before the age of 45, or 45 and under. And so, ultimately, we've had a lot of responsibility at a relatively young age. And so it is a peer network that is committed to lifelong learning, that's committed to whole self leadership. So it's not just about business, it's about family, it's about personal growth as well. It is very much around, observing the highest possible community standards. It's not a business organization that pitches to each other or solicits. I mean, there are places within YPO where you can do that in terms of specific networks or events, but generally it's leaders helping leaders become um, better leaders in all facets of their life.
Understood, understood. And I know most recently, after years of corporate leadership, you have taken the leap into founding Trim Consultancy. Can you share what made you take that leap and what Trim Consultancy does?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously, I enjoyed a very long and thankfully successful journey building the courts business across Southeast Asia. I then had 4 years with the transformation project with Matahari in Indonesia, and that ran parallel with COVID as well. So it's kind of it's part crisis management, part transforming, and but clearly even with courts, there were sort of three phases of my time there. One was working for a UK multinational, essentially as a subsidiary managing director. The second was as an entrepreneur working with private equity to restructure the business across Southeast Asia. Um, the third was back to a listed company. So I kind of went listed company, private, listed again, and managing multiple stakeholders. And so there probably isn't a corporate action during that period where I haven't, whether it's privatization, whether it's listing, whether it's buybacks, whether it's acquisitions, that I haven't been engaged with one way or another. And so you come to the point where you've got the sum total of this body of work. And, do you want to do it again? Or do you want to stay across multiple touch points? So I think the idea behind Trim literally translates to transforming results, impacting many. It's working with more companies on a fractional basis. Ultimately, we're not we're not McKinsey or Bain with a full suite of very talented partners and associates and so on. It's more of a sort of smaller boutique personal advisory situation where I can help the founder, the CEO, the family of businesses to scale. And it's part advice and part operational know-how. And so we could be running a strategy session, and if we have to pause and solve a specific problem and dive into something, but anything really of a consumer nature, then that's perfectly fine. In other cases, it's people in the retail ecosystem that need to just navigate retail in Southeast Asia. So it could be retailers or consumer companies facing retail.
Understood. So generally, if there's a consumer twist in there, then that's where your consultancy firm would fit in quite nicely.
Yeah, I mean, but pretty much, I've been around in Southeast Asia so long. I mean, if a business has got a challenge, I probably know somebody we could team up with to fix it on a very practical human level as well. So,
Yeah.
we get lots of eccentric requests, which is fine.
Understood. I'd like to move on now to talk about your general philosophies and leadership. Now you talk about your approach as being action dispels fear. How did that shape your leadership style during some of these undoubtedly high pressure transformations?
Well, I mean, I come back to the early days with color vision and being a sort of a serial learner. My chairman had he had a suite of books in his office. You used to go and kind of sign them out, and read them. And one was everything is negotiable, and the other is the magic of thinking big. And I can remember all these to sort of every week I was consuming another book. And I don't know, I can't remember which book it was, to be honest, but one of these books, the phrase was, action cures fear. Maybe we changed that over the years to dispels, but it's really just that idea of, if you've got a big problem or you've got a big challenge, just break it down. Take the Monday morning action, set up the discussion, make the phone call. You might be able to do an end-to-end plan for this. You might not. You might just not know where this is going. It's a bit of an unknown quantity. It's a path that we've never um, trod before. And so, but the moment you take those first actions, you schedule those discussions, you make those outreaches, and you start that feedback loop coming, anxiety just immediately falls. Just immediately falls. I mean, so action as a habit is energizing, and procrastination is crippling.
Mm. Understood, understood. And I mean, what have been some of the most important lessons then as a CEO about people, strategy, and culture?
I mean, I subscribe to that sort of Jim Collins philosophy of, just get the right people on the bus. And so I think everything starts with the right people, the right team. The right people make things happen. The right people energize me too. So, you've got that sort of whole sparring piece. I also subscribe to Drucker's, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I think that's, um, you know, we can have many different strategic options facing us, right? But ultimately, the right kind of culture is the one that says, you know, uh, we we're collaborating, but we are, we're fearless. We need to make a pause if we need to take a different direction. There's no ego in the room. That we've subscribed to a sort of set of values that make us sort of challenge, question ourselves, take a step back, or, and so on. And so I think, having a set of values that are genuinely lived. In my former company, we had humility, collaboration, competition, innovation, and giving back, and
Mm,
um, and they all come from a particular place. They don't, they shouldn't be just words. They should be words that resonate with people because of actual situations. We're
mm,
humble because we don't want the arrogance of a market leader. Um, we compete because we want to be externally curious. We don't want to damage other companies. We just want to learn and get better. We collaborate because that's what makes this a great place to work. We innovate, but we only innovate in the service of the customer or our employees. And we give back because that's what great companies do. We have a responsibility to return something to the communities that have made us where we are. There's got to be a guiding philosophy. Once you've got that kind of strength of unity across a team, shared values, really strong culture, honestly, strategy is quite easy. I mean, there are only so many ways to do things. It's just it's the approach
mm.
of compelling teams that makes the difference.
So I have two follow-on questions from that. So the first thing I'd like to dig into, Terry, is humility as a non-market leader. So I think I met you when I was still with Corn Ferry, but previous to Corn Ferry, I'd worked for what you'd call challenger companies.
Sure.
And what I found was that in challenger companies, I wouldn't say beating your chest because we're in Southeast Asia and culture here is a bit different than how things work in a London or a Hong Kong. But I found that look, we were humble on the inside, but externally we would beat the drum and say, hey, look, we're better than these guys because of these reasons. So I'd like to ask how you feel humility fits into that challenger mentality when you're building and growing companies that aren't number one in a sector.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, look, if I go back to, I mean, right, really throughout my career, right back in the television days, we just thought, Dixon Stores Group, which then became Curry's PLC, was an amazing company. We just felt that the way they shot products, the way they communicated product knowledge, the way they did a sort of divide and grow of their stores was amazing. So we studied it. We really studied it, and we really thought, well, like, okay, what are we sort of, what are we, yeah, as the minnow, what do we sort of take on board? But we're also aware that there's certain things that we could do that they couldn't do, right? We could buy smaller job lots of product, right? That they couldn't even just, it would be too small to distribute across their stores. We could spin on a dime when it came to marketing. Maybe they have to sort of plan, a year in advance. We could change things next Saturday. And so we smaller companies can be more agile. Bigger companies have got admirable processes and replicable habits, driven off certain best practices. And so
Mm,
I think the most important thing for teams of any size is to be curious. I really do think that the number one leadership attribute of any team is curiosity.
mm,
From any vantage point, you can learn, you can take things, you can take digital best practices, omni-channel best practices, fulfillment best practices. Of course, they're not going to fit necessarily within the context of the market. Some of the things that work in Singapore, they don't work in Jakarta because the physical dimension of traffic is a big differentiator in the way that consumers behave.
mm. Understood. And just to kind of go back to the original outlay there around Jim Collins and his philosophies, do you think they transplant well to Southeast Asia, or do you think we need to adapt them to reflect the cultural nuance of, I wouldn't even say just Southeast Asia because each country is different, but do we need to adapt those philosophies for them to really be impactful here?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I mean, I think ultimately the whole I think the consistent thing is agile thinking and being prepared to test and iterate and adjust. Right. So
Mm,
there's nothing wrong with assuming, look, there's a global player here with a few best practices. Let's see if they translate. But you can't assume that they're going to work. You have to test. I mean, Walmart were very famous, and Target, I think, as well at one point having store greeters. And so we tried store greeters here in Singapore back in my early course days, and customers were horrified. They would literally they'll sort of come in and try to avoid the person on the door, right? That it was just too much, you know, Americanism in your face, overly
yeah.
happy, and so on. And so maybe that works in the US, maybe it work in Europe, but it definitely didn't work in Asia. So we scrapped that, and then we said, okay, well, we need customers to know that we care, that we've acknowledged their presence, um, and so we sort of set a 60-second rule, and that is,
Mm,
don't be in the customer's face, but just make sure that within 60 seconds of them entering the store, they've been acknowledged, they know your name, and they know that you're available. That's it, and that worked a dream. That people just, if they want that sort of breathing space to be left alone, it's okay, but they know where to
mm.
go and get some help. So um, it's trial and error, but it's very quick when you've got the right culture to find things that land and they work.
Yeah, that makes sense. And these seem to be fairly pervasive retail philosophies. My first jobs while at university, I worked in House of Fraser in the UK on the men's section, and then I moved to Heels, which is the mattress and homewares
I know
business
it.
when they
Yeah,
set up in Manchester. So I was working there, and we were taught similar. And then I've heard about store greeters because my mum is still working customer service for Tesco in the UK. So I get to hear about what they're trying that's new and innovative. It's always quite interesting to see what Americanisms they adapt and which ones they realize maybe don't work in the north of England.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I mean, to translate that all into building an organization, then, one of the key things about building successful organizations is human capital. So, when you're building these teams, when you're building dynamic teams, what qualities, besides curiosity, because that seems to be a front runner, what qualities do you look for in the people that you promote or hire?
I mean, look, you know, I always look for tenacity, resilience. Um, I, obviously, ideally, you get some form of track record that they've done something before that is a sort of window on the future. Um, but that's not always the most important thing because there might be early on in their career, and it might be more the sort of the spark and the energy level. And the questions they ask you, that you just feel like actually they're just going to be like a knife through butter on whatever you give them. So it might be some
Mm,
personal um, energy, momentum type characteristics. I mean, obviously, there's functional stuff. You can't. You clearly need certain skills if you're going to be in finance or planning and allocation. You might need a certain amount of art and science combination if you're going to be a marketeer, and so on. But beyond that, you're looking for fit. You're looking for, will this person slot in and raise the overall level and capability of the team? Will
mm,
they push people to be better because they've got a certain level of energy, intellect, vibrancy that they bring to the table. Of course,
mm,
sometimes you're looking for the new and the different. That my team is perfectly strong, but the industry is changing. Clearly, with digital disruption, with strategic horizons, maybe going from 10 years to 5 years to 3 years to now maybe to 24 months, and we've got to work in
mm,
different ways. Does the person bring a level of openness, agile thinking, etc.? And you're just looking for it's a bit like sort of placing the formation of a football team on a field, right? You're looking for, the right balance between um, strikers, solid midfield, and
mm,
defenders, because we're looking for people who can build a business. We're looking for people who can run the business. We're
mm,
looking for people that can help us mitigate risk, and we're looking for people that can help us with solid financial foundations. And you've just got to have the right blend and mix across the team.
Yeah, yeah. I think you should have a word with the current Man U setup, Terry, based on that. Liverpool, they're leading the league at the moment, and Man U past few years, I mean, gosh, it's been a bit of a fall off.
Well, we had our own years of heartache, so I've learned not to crow too much because you never know what's around the corner. But hopefully, I'll see us lift the trophy in May back in the UK.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. And just to bring that into modern leadership, you've got new generations of leaders coming through, management that are aspirational leaders as well. And you're quite involved in the youth advisory boards, and you're contributing to leadership organizations like YPO. What do you think the next generation of leaders is missing or getting right? I mean, what are they doing well, and what could they improve on?
I'm not somebody that beats up on youth and sort of says, back in my day, we had to sort of walk to school, and they don't, I don't do all of that. I think
Yeah.
actually the youth and young leaders of today are a lot more resilient than we give them credit for. Maybe they don't they want to sort of avoid the idea of working a continuum of 40 years and then having a retirement that may or may not happen. Maybe they're reinventing themselves, learning new skills. I mean, in this age of AI, um, we're going to have to learn, unlearn, relearn, on a continuous
Mm,
basis anyway. And so if you actually take that as a positive, well, then, mini career breaks and giving yourself time to reflect and be creative and, making sort of pivots, I think is all going to come good in the future because,
mm,
ultimately in an age where AI can do anything except maybe, the art of human joy and human fulfillment and special, surprising experiences. That
mm,
sort of versatility, I think, is going to be important. So I think we have a lot to learn
mm,
from younger leaders. I really do in terms of their breath of fresh air, attitudinal stuff. The only thing I would caution against is, there is maybe a tendency in this day and age for your politics to define you. And,
mm,
business is about bringing people together, not being divisive. And so
mm,
I think the more we go into this sort of um, social media echo chamber, the more we only get pushed information that sort of reinforces, whatever pre-existing beliefs or
mm,
attitudes we have. That can be sort of counterculture in terms of building a team that tries to understand each other's cultures, understand each other's point of view, and building the best of the best. And so that's why curiosity really matters. That's why, open-mindedness matters. That's why actively seeking out diverse perspectives is really
mm.
crucial.
Yeah, I'd have to agree there. I think now the algorithms, they're built for a certain purpose, and it is to push you content that reinforces your self-belief. And the danger with that is that we're creating this hollow middle, and you've got two extremes on either side, almost at war with each other. I mean, there are that middle because you have people that are seeking out information, like you said, that are curious. Um, but I don't recall in my early employment years anyone mentioning or anyone asking which party I was voting for. Maybe they assumed I was Labour because I'm from Manchester. I don't know, but yeah, nobody really cared or asked. It's always very much about who the person is, and I think that is something we should really carry through for the modern workforce as well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's diversity. What was the best phrase I heard? It was like diversity is your invitation to the party, and inclusion is your invitation to dance or your opportunity to dance. I
Mm,
mean, I think it's ultimately, having uh, meritocracy at the core. Really seeking to build a multi-talented, multicultural, diverse team that brings different perspectives and makes the whole, better than the sum of the
mm.
parts.
And we touched on leaders there briefly, and how I guess the next generation and what modern leadership need to know. In terms of the workforce itself, though, and managing intergenerationally, Do you have any insight there, like how you would lead someone who is, a Gen X, someone who's a millennial versus a Gen Z? Any wisdom you want to share there, Terry?
Look, I think, ultimately it's about asking the right questions. I mean, if you're genuinely committed to motivating a team, then, well, what motivates you?
Mm,
What are your hopes? What are your aspirations? And maybe some of those things are consistent across generations, and maybe some of those things are different. Different
mm,
perspective from coming up in a different era, digitally enabled, digital natives, etc. So, but if you if you lead with questions rather than answers, if you basically sort of talk to people across the generations and sort of say, what are the challenges that you're facing, what are the potential solutions, um, which one of those solutions are you favoring at the moment and why, and how
mm.
can I help? How can I help you sort of move that along, or get to the desired outcome? um, yeah, the answers may have a sort of generational lens, but
Mm.
the questions don't really change.
Understood. So technically, you've actually got the answers in front of you. You just got to ask the right questions to find out what it is you need to do.
Yeah, different things make people tick in different ways, and I think as leaders, it's for us to. I mean, look, there are certain baselines. We have to create psychological safety at work, right? People have to be in their open state, not in their closed state. People have to know that they can, put their hand up, say something, which they feel in their mind might be silly, and not be humiliated. I mean, there's just basics that have to be there regardless, and that's where culture is so important, that
Mm,
we can kick something around. You might think it's ridiculous. I actually might think it's brilliant. And so please offer the ridiculous, because we need every potential option put on the table. Um,
mm,
but then it's really about sort of getting that blend of inputs in a very, we talk in YPO a lot about safe havens,
mm,
and forum style environments, which are highly confidential, and just creating that sort of um, emotional safety, tribal culture, winning spirit, um, you know, social place at work, extension of a family. And I know people, I hear a lot of criticism recently going, oh, these corporate executives, they talk about sort of, work being your family. It's not your family. That's what they sell you on, etc. Um, Actually, no. I honestly, I believe that, one of the best emotional journeys that you can have in your life is when you're in
mm,
a workplace that brings the best out of you, and,
mm,
brings your best talents to a multiplier effect.
mm. And does YPO talk about mentorship often as well? I mean, do you have any advice for young professionals trying to find the right mentor, perhaps, or even to be one if they've reached that peak themselves?
I think if you want a mentor, ask, because you will be surprised at the number of times people will say yes. Um, and equally, you know uh, if you're going to take a mentor, just right out of the blocks, the mentor and the mentee should just agree on the ground rules. It shouldn't be awkward to sort of separate that relationship. It's fine to be in it for two coaching sessions, and then you kind of got what you need. And it's time to move on. You don't, it doesn't need to be. People think of mentoring relationships as decades or years, right? It could be just two sessions. I've got something on my mind. I've got a particular skill set that I'd like to flex or build. And can I get something from this person? And that actually provides an off ramp for both parties, right? Because you're not
Mm,
you're not stuck in this thing, and then it becomes a bit awkward when you got it from you. And then equally, if you're a mentee, um, it's if you or if you want to be a mentor, reverse mentorship, um, then put it out there as well, because actually that makes it even easier, right? Because you're sort of saying, well, actually I do want somebody to mentor me, but I've got a particular deep domain knowledge of AI, or certain productivity hacks in terms of apps, or things that I can sort of help with as well. I mean, the more that relationship can be a two-way street, the better value exchange there is.
Mm. Understood. I mean, moving along, Terry, I'm curious to look at more of a personal perspective here as well. So things beyond the boardroom and pure leadership. I'm aware that you've raised millions. I think the number was 5 million for charity with your wife. How do you balance purpose, profit, and personal life?
I've always felt that, I mean, first of all, the number one thing that you get from any interaction, whether it be work, personal, or in any walk of life, is gratitude, right? If I mean, the science is there that, giving, actually gives you like way more benefits than receiving. Receiving is a kind of short term, phenomenon. Giving is, it kind of really builds that um, muscle of, self worth, self esteem, and so on. And so I've, from the age of 13, I think I was volunteering with my uncle's charity, the Northwest Handicapped Children's Society. And I know we don't use those terms anymore, but that is what it was called. As a helper, summer camps, that sort of thing.
Mm,
When Janice and I had our kids, we were sort of settling into a new life in Singapore. Um, but I think by 2001, Daniel was 9 and Jennifer was 6, and so we had sort of time to organize charity events. And of course, by that time, you just know more people, right? You know more hoteliers, more restaurants, more members clubs. You got your friendship circle is wide. It's not just corporate. It's beyond corporate as well. And so we realized that we had sort of special set of circumstances, you know, strong professional links, strong personal links, strong reach to be able to put events together, which really had no cost, like a zero cost. And so therefore, you get the power of when you can say to people, come along to this charity event, and if you donate $100 is going to the charity.
mm,
And so it's a pass through, was quite powerful. And that was just leveraging the network. That was leveraging the corporate network and the personal network as a hybrid. And so because of that, then more people get on board because they believe in what you're doing. And so, it took on a life of its own. Thankfully we were recognized by the president of Singapore in, I think, 2014 or 2015 as we won the award for most, I don't know, best informal organization, I think was the
mm,
actual title on it. But and that was not, we had that night the sponsors, the volunteers, the people that had helped us along the way. They sort of attended that dinner. We've had wine sponsors, we've had F&B sponsors, we've had the people that built the tentage, we've had the people that constructed the stage, we've had the people that performed, and
mm,
so on. So yeah, as you can probably tell, it's a lot of fun. It's not a chore, right? If you do it the right
mm,
way, if you're not trying to, you know, emotionally distress people, but you're trying to make them feel joyful about giving, it can
mm,
be. And of course, there are emotional moments along the way.
mm.
You can't help that if you can really sort of get some outcomes. Um, but we try to make the events themselves, um, really evenings or occasions that people look forward to.
Mm. And you shared with me your book, and when I met you in Jakarta, I didn't realize you had written a book, but you shared with me recently your book called Why Not? For those listening who maybe aren't familiar, can you give a brief overview of what Why Not is about?
Um, well, it was really, if you think about those Courts journeys, Courts went bust in the UK. That was largely due to UK based debt. We had this sort of journey, or fork in the road, where I had to decide whether I stayed with the company
mm,
and led a team that was essentially in a business that was up for sale, um, or pursued my own career norms. And generally, at any of those sort of pivotal moments in my career or life, um, the attitudinal piece has been, why not? Well, you know what, just why not? Maybe I had in mind, that I would follow a particular corporate route. I'm now going to take an entrepreneurial route. If I take a very decisive, well, why can't we find private equity partners? Why can't we buy this business? Why can't we, we're all corporate hired guns. Why can't we be entrepreneurs?
mm,
Why can't we pivot? It's very energizing, so the
mm,
power of that question, why not? Especially when somebody says you can't do something,
mm,
I think it's a pivotal game changer in terms of then, giving you the energy to take on a new path. And so I wrote about it. I wrote about the parallel between the corporate journey and the personal journey under this sort of common banner of, why not be a
mm.
maverick? Why not be different?
Was the court's journey the biggest or the hardest why not decision that you've had to make, or is there something else that was even harder?
I think coming to Asia as a 25-year-old was a big deal. I think, going from corporate gun to entrepreneur with the court shift, um, it was a step into the unknown, because for 2.5 years we were effectively dealing with KPMG as Courts PLC in administration, right?
Mm,
Um, and in the shop window. So we didn't know, whether we were going to find the right partners, whether it was going to be sold to a corporate. I had to be like, super balanced and professional. Of course, we had an outcome that would, be great for the team, etc. But ultimately, our duty was the shareholders, and to just get the best possible, returns for them. Um, I think listing the company. We tried to list the company and we had to withdraw in 2010, and then therefore analyzing what went wrong, why should we do what should we do differently, to then get it listed successfully in 2012 as Quartz Asia. That was big moments, and of course, maybe, having spent all of that time with Court and in Southeast Asia, returning to a corporate gun in a new country, Indonesia, for 4 years was a big step. I
mm,
could have just, taken the comfortable option, and just had the Court's journey was great. I'm gonna, enjoy my life, but a new challenge with sensational people was quite compelling, as well. And so it's, for me, it's around, you know, giving great teams the kind of tools and the wings that they need to fly and be successful. And so there've been a few pivotal moments, I think.
mm. And just to put some context around that move to Singapore, because nowadays Singapore is on the global map. It's preferred by many to career options in Europe or the US, given how economies are developing or not developing there. No, I moved to Singapore in 2009, and I was telling people back home in Manchester that I've moved to Singapore, and they thought it was part of China still. So to put into context the bravery, the why not of that move to Singapore, what year did you move out there, Terry?
1993. So I'm 56 now. I was 25 years old
Okay.
then.
Yeah.
I basically, my wife's from Hong Kong. I was dealing with Asian suppliers because I was in the consumer electronics retail business. Um, and I did not want to compete with my former employer. So, I think a number of factors sort of said, well, why not just, get that Asian experience on the CV was the thinking, maybe do that for three
Mm,
years, move back, put a bit of distance between, the employer that gave me the start in life, if you like, and then figuring out what came next. Obviously, I didn't
mm,
leave, but the search was for a role in Hong Kong, and
mm,
Singapore was by accident. I mean, because obviously my wife's from Hong Kong, my suppliers are from Hong Kong, China based. Um, but then because I was looking, somebody said, "Hey, there's this business called Courts that's got, it's UK
mm,
based, but it's got stores in Singapore, Malaysia,
Mm.
Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Mauritius, and also throughout the Caribbean islands, Barbados, Jamaica. I'd never heard of it. I'd never heard of Quartz because actually it was one of those strange companies where um, I was from the north of England, but Quartz stores in the UK were generally in the south, and so
Yeah,
their advertising was in southern edition of media. This was
yeah.
pre digital, right? So um, they just weren't on my radar at all. And then when I came to Singapore, I was pleasantly surprised because my mental image of Singapore was Hong Kong. And so, it was greener than I expected. The apartments were bigger than I expected. The ease of
Mm.
getting around was better than I expected. I mean, you could say it was a little bit sterile, I guess, at that time, but we had a 1 year old baby and, a career that was relatively young, and it's in its infancy as well. And so it was definitely the right place at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, I recall when I moved to Singapore, and I recall the Court store on Orchard Road. There was a pretty big Court store that sold a mix of electronics and home furnishings, and it must have been the first time that I'd come across Courts. Again, being a northerner, I spent a couple of years in London before making the move out to Singapore, but Singapore was the first experience I'd had of the brand and the business. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah, well, so that's a lesson for young executives in itself, isn't it? Because sometimes you just you need to look beyond the obvious, look beyond the obvious names, leaders in the industry. There are some amazing, exceptional companies that fly below the radar. And
mm,
sometimes if a search firm called you and sort of said, "Hey, do you want to have a conversation with, this company?" You might sort of, you might miss an opportunity if you're not open-minded and curious enough to go along and just, find out.
yeah, makes sense. And look, I mean, you're clearly at the clearly at the top of your game in many ways. You know, you've ticked so many boxes, been recognized by so many organizations, and have this success story. How do you personally keep growing when you're in this position?
Um, well, I mean, YPO is a network of 37,000 chief execs, right? And a lot of them are smarter than I am. So it's clearly, there's a whole network there of people to lean into. I was attending the YPO Harvard program, President's program for the last 10 years. I graduated last year, but I extended as a group leader this year. Amazing human beings, who just do so much beyond their companies in terms of, personal and community impact. Amazing professors, are very approachable. And so, I've continued the academic. I mean, I was a bit weird with my academia. I kind of left school at 17. I did a master's through work elements at 27, and I've done the Harvard thing, et cetera. So I've always said education doesn't need to be linear. It's what's right for you at the time of your life, and that seems to be gaining traction now in terms of, well, when do people do degrees? When do they do new degrees? When do they revisit
Mhm.
vocational learning? And so on. But I've kind of always subscribed to that. Um, look, there are only really two ways that you learn, right? You learn from what you read and people you talk to, and so
Mm.
it's really important that you are conscious about what defines a peer, and it's not money, and it's not status. It's people with the right values. It's the people with skills and learning that rubs off on you by osmosis, and values that and that together you can achieve things, etc. And so I think my biggest point of learning is from the amazing people I have the good fortune to hang out with, and I've always tried to just keep in touch with the latest, whether it's AI now, whether it's the future of work, just what are the hot topics of today. And
Mm.
I don't have to be the expert. There's plenty of experts, but I need to know enough to be able to ask the right questions.
Yeah. So distilling that down into retail then, specifically, Terry, since that's where I guess it's been your bread and butter for many years. So retail has changed dramatically. COVID had a major impact on that. And then I guess that accelerated things, but it's still evolving and it's still changing. What excites you most about the future of retail, especially in Southeast Asia?
Well, look, I mean, I think, oh, look, retail at its core needs to be more experiential, right? I mean, and I think most retailers get that. They understand, well, clearly if online is about functional accessibility, speed, processes, delivery to home, etc. If that's around just dropping something off at your doorstep efficiently and at the right price and at the right time, etc., that's great. But clearly that's not a very joyful practical human experience. And and so a world without stores, a world without human interaction is a pretty sad world, and I would say that as a retailer. And so ultimately it's about making sure that you are an expert across channels, and that means that you've got to have the digital piping that works. It's efficient,
Mm,
it's predictable, it's on brand. Whether that's online through the app, whether that's in social media, whether that's in social commerce. Obviously those touch points will vary depending on the market and depending on the way people like to consume your product.
mm,
But that's all got to, at the heart of it, that's got to be with amazing stores, amazing colleagues in those stores. And when I say amazing stores, I don't, you could be a value retailer, but just be the best value retailer in the world, right? Have the best $1 assortment for the best, relative value. Have the easiest way to shop it, the best sort of silent salesman in terms of how to read and consume the information that you need, etc. So this is not a prestige or a luxury point. Um,
mm,
Experience could be the energy level of the staff because they get behind a tribal type message in the morning and they're on point in terms of what they want to deliver to the customer. Um, and so I think it's just about making sure that you have a brand that's alive, it's vibrant, it meets your customers where they want to be met. Sometimes for practical access to goods, and sometimes for the joyful experience of having capable and well-driven human beings dealing with them.
yeah, I mean, we're seeing Asia and APAC coming onto the radar more and more these days as well. Companies see it as uncharted territories, or perhaps they see the GDP growth figures and figure out, hey, we should really be there. So I deal with lots of global firms that are entering across multiple sectors. In your opinion, and this can be retail, it can be beyond retail, Terry, but in your opinion, what's the biggest misunderstanding that global firms have about the Southeast Asian markets?
I mean, I think there are lots. I mean, obviously, if you look across Southeast Asia, too often you hear Singapore is the gateway to Southeast Asia. I mean, Singapore is an important opinion forming market. It's a place where, maybe globally, you have to be. I mean, in some areas now, you might sort of say Singapore, Hong Kong, Shanghai, New York, London, Paris. It's a global center of excellence. Um, but what you do in Singapore actually has little bearing on what you would then do in Indonesia or in Malaysia. They're like very different
Mm,
markets. So, I think you've got to have a country by country game plan,
mm,
not a, well, we're going to do this in this entry point and then we're going to replicate it. That's not necessarily going to work for you, depending on the nature of your business. Um, I think Indonesia is an amazing market with maybe an identity problem. More people internationally might know Bali than they know Jakarta. That we have to address that because it's a vibrant market. It's an important market, and half of all consumer economics in Southeast Asia are going to be Indonesia. So
mm,
that we have to get Indonesia, you know, globally better known. I think.
mm,
Malaysia seems to have come through a tougher spell, as does the Philippines, and they're doing relatively better now. Maybe they should be looked at a bit more seriously. And I think the world is recognizing that the Bangkok has got a lot to offer as well. So I think don't think about Southeast Asia as homogenous. I think is the message. Think
mm.
about them as distinct and increasingly important markets.
It's a great point. I mean, even countries within Southeast Asia can't be thought of as one in some situations. I've spoken about how that's the case for Indonesia before, how what works in Jakarta is very different than what works in somewhere like Sulawesi or even Bali, with a different demographic of who is based there and who is consuming there. Um, I mean, beyond that as well, I think about the GDP numbers for the region. So for this year coming, Philippines and Vietnam are actually at the highest in terms of expected GDP. I think it's about 6.5% for the Philippines and 6.4 for Vietnam. So people are taking notice.
I didn't mean to do Vietnam a disservice by not mentioning it. I should have mentioned Vietnam as a.
So Vietnam's up there. I mean, they're opening up to FDI at the moment. They're rolling out the red carpet for investment coming in. And yeah, it's really on the radar. It's becoming so competitive at the moment in the region for global dollar. And everyone's trying to one up each other with tax breaks. Indonesia's been a little bit less willing on that front. But yeah, it's such a dynamic place. And as you said, one size doesn't fit all. We don't have this European Union kind of structure here. It's all very different. And I think firms coming in, they see the dollar signs, but they don't necessarily realize that we're in a very disparate part of the world, both in terms of identity and culture, before we even get to the behavior on the ground.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
I mean, talking about Indonesia, because you mentioned this Matahari role, and you were at Matahari for 4 years. I think Matahari is part of the larger Lippo ecosystem, which is owned by one of the prominent family conglomerates here, the so Lippo Group, which is the Riyadi family. So when you were there, you introduced something which I found really interesting when I was reading about it, something called the House of Specialists. It was an omnichannel strategy, from what I understand. What does that mean in practice, and how did it change the game for the Matahari brand?
I think, I think the overall kind of thought process there would apply to any department store anywhere in the world, right? Is that, you know, you you have to think about the department store format as being, challenged in Western markets, maybe challenged in all markets to a certain extent. Um, but but generally speaking, if you think about a department store, there will be a core, maybe with some it's female fashion, maybe with others it's a great food hall, maybe with some it's about the level of sort of premium experiences, etc. Um, but I think you have to decide, what's your core and what are you going to specialize in. Um, and if you're not going to be the best toy retailer in the market, do we just curate that range down to something that's much smaller, like plush toys, and let the toy retailer have the toy economics? Because if we're not going to
Mm,
do it, if we're not going to do it well, then what's the point? And so the idea behind the term house of specialists is just to sort of say, let's make sure that whatever we bring to the market, we bring it to the market with the same zeal, capability, energy, and attention to
mm,
detail as if it was the only thing that we do. Right. So let's be the best, in Matahari's case, if we're going to do menswear, let's be the best menswear retailer in the market. I genuinely believe that Matahari is the best menswear retailer in Indonesia by a country mile. In Court's case, if we are going to, if color televisions have then gone to plasma screens, have gone to LED, have gone to 8K, and wherever the future is in terms of the way people consume the visual images, let's just make sure that we
mm,
do that better than anybody else. The biggest bank, the best visuals, the best use of technology, the best experiential things happening in the stores related to sports or related to
mm,
movies or however people kind of emotionally connect with that category. Um,
mm,
and so I think for retailers, it's just, where are we playing? How do we win? And and how do we wrap that around our digital approach, right? Because then those messages have also got to come across online, on the app. If your people are engaged in their spare time with social commerce, or they're doing TikTok videos, or whatever those touch points are with the customers. Those messages have also got to be there. That capability has got to be there. We've got to make sure that the harmonization of channels shows a window on what we are world class at. And that I think, I think it's for any retailer for that matter. It's just a way to galvanize people against this, doom and gloom of being disrupted,
Mm.
because disruption really happens at to a certain extent in retail. Disruption happens at certain levels in the market, generally more at the price pointed end of the market, less about the sort of clienteling at the top of the market, maybe dimensions in between.
And as a quick sidebar from that question, Terry, so I've not seen it in Asia yet, but I read about it in the UK and maybe the US. But I've noticed that there have been brand leaders, let's say historical brand leaders in retail, that maybe aren't doing so well now. And what they've done is they've struck up partnerships with brands that maybe are general retailers that are doing well. So an example might be, and I'm not sure if this is the right example, but for example, a brand like Toys R Us. So Toys R Us, as an independent retailer in the UK, I don't think it's operating anymore. But what they've done is they've struck up a partnership with Tesco or one of the big retailers to collaborate. So what they're doing is they're leveraging the brand equity that they have, and they're partnering with general retail. Is that a trend that you see developing?
I mean, I think so. I mean, I think it's ultimately, it depends on the evolution of a business, right? I mean, if the evolution of a business is you've been amazing, you've been market leader, um, but then maybe you've hit a brick wall because you haven't changed enough.
Mm,
Maybe in terms of your own store format, in terms of the coverage. I mean, I don't know Toys R Us business like you know uh, intimately, but I would sort of say, if you took a look back over the last 20 years and said, right, where's the share of wallet for um, for what parents are buying for kids in terms of consumption, I would imagine that, digital to one side, because every retailer's got to master that, maybe more things have gone from things in a box to electronics, maybe more things have got an early learning component, etc. So,
mm,
I'm sure generally, parents are still spending good money on their kids. It's just, it's probably just spent in adjacent areas. Now, how have they mastered that shift? Should Toys R Us have become part consumer electronics retailer?
mm,
Part what Toys R Us was before, part early learning center, part Best Buy. I mean, like in
mm,
terms of those areas that matter. They haven't made those category shifts because you've got this relationship to protect with Mattel, and you've got this relationship to protect with somebody else, or you have had private equity ownership, and they haven't pumped a lot of money in, they've taken money out, and so therefore you haven't been able to upgrade the stores to embrace the new
mm,
categories. Well, guess what? Then maybe the best thing to do is partnerships, because
yeah.
partnerships are generally a revenue share licensing type arrangement, and maybe they're not capital intensive. And so um, it really depends on where the business has been in terms of its reinvention transformation, and where has it been in terms of its ability to pay for that reinvention as well. And quite often, the answer might be partnerships because it's asset light.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, looking to the future of retail then as well, how does AI piece into all of this? Is it a tool for the greater good? Is it something that will totally shake the industry up and make things difficult? How do you see AI playing a part, Terry?
In the positive camp, right? I think,
Yep.
if you take all of the core emotions, the multiple negative ones, let an AI chatbot sort of take that off your hands and make sure that it's the issue of human error is taken out of the way. I think there'll be multiple AIs, multiple bots for for industry specialization, for sub specialization within the industry, etc., etc. So is one trained on returns? Is one trained on store locations? Is one trained on the right answers around sizes and materials or whatever it is, depending on the category. But humans ideally should be left to handle the joy part. They should be left
Mm,
to handle the positive, surprising elements of the piece. So I can see a world in which, this automation of call centers and that sort of thing, which frustrates the hell out of people, gets turned on its head where, actually all the things that you don't see, are handled by AI, and what
mm,
returns to be the um, core DNA or defining differentiation of a company is the human talent. And so I think it coexists. Of course, the nature of work itself will change. Of course, people will need to be reskilled and retooled for a different
mm.
age. Maybe we need a layer of management just to deal with the AIs, But I do feel, you know, from a medicinal point of view, from a um, zero failure point of view, from a customer experience point of view, that there are lots of upside. I just hope that, I just hope the companies don't ultimately take it as a one-trick pony to just um, reduce jobs, reduce people, etc. I mean, everybody wants to be naturally
Mm.
more efficient, and I guess the concepts of natural um, economic wage or 3-day weeks or 4-day weeks. I guess these are things that will all come, and as modern progressive companies, we've got to look at it, but we've also got a duty to society to make sure that those transitions are managed in a human centric way.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I found quite intriguing about client of mine or multiple clients in the insurance industry is how they're adapting. So we talked about customer support there, and what they've been doing, they've been using technology to reframe customer support to move it from being a cost center to a cost neutral function. So they're almost bringing it together with the marketing department, where having those touch points with your customers, with your clients, can actually be quite a powerful tool. And using AI to better understand them can help with recommendations that not only drive profit, but also have customers feeling that they've left with a good deal as well. So there definitely is potential in that B2C market, I think, for keeping the human element and augmenting it with something like AI. That would be
Yeah, I
my
I
personal
think I
take.
think so. I mean, I really hope that companies will adopt AI at a rapid rate, but they'll adopt it through the lens of um, making our people more effective.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, I mean, talking about effectiveness in companies, you've had this history working with private equity businesses, working with turnarounds of organizations as well. Um, I'm just curious, where does this appetite for transformation come from? Because as you mentioned, you could have put your feet up a while ago. You took on the Matahari role. Um, were you always someone who saw opportunity and challenge?
I don't generally get um, flustered by a crisis, I guess, is the thing. I mean, I get flustered by lots of things. If I get, if I'm running a company and we get a negative customer letter in the press, I mean, I jump all over that and want to deal with it myself. And I feel like personally, like, oh my God, like
Mm,
that's my problem. I do sort of take the whole reputation piece like extremely seriously. Um, but if everybody's in the same boat, the global financial crisis, COVID, the Asian currency crisis, and SARS, if you go back further, I think these are moments where you can really um, accelerate change.
mm,
When everybody else cuts back, when everybody else stops the marketing, when they cut the training budget, when they sort of go into their shells because it's a bad world out there, I think the opportunity for that kind of slingshot effect to get
mm.
further ahead when it's over is immense. And so I've always kind of like thought, okay, how do we, you know, if we're thinking about turnaround, right? Just what are the what are the parts of our business that it just shouldn't be here? We shouldn't be in that store. We shouldn't be in that category. We can't possibly be market leader in this area. How do we just get rid of that? And how do we use this crisis or this turnaround momentum or this burning platform as a momentum to get everybody to buy into. These are all
Mm,
the hard truths that we need to have the discussion about, and this is the action plan. Um, and it's just harder to do that when everything's going well, right? Because people just don't have the impetus to change or to make the tough calls, etc. And and so I think never, there's a phrase, right? We've all heard it: "Never waste a good crisis." I mean, I think it's extremely true. Kotter's 8 stages of change. I mean, it's like, if have a crisis. If you don't have a crisis, invent one. Just have a burning platform that everybody gets behind. It could be AI at the moment. It could be, digital disruption. It could be, whatever you need to get momentum across people, just, to galvanize that sort of togetherness. I
mm,
think it's important. And when you galvanize togetherness, it's really exciting, right? And
mm,
I think, transformation is a word that's just thrown around too much at the moment, right? Like, what is transformation, right? Okay, well, here's our current state and here's our desired state. And we don't even know actually whether our desired state will be desirable when we get there because the market's moving so fast anyway. But let's kind of think about a time horizon that's realistic, 2 years
mm,
or 3 years, because we probably don't know what's going on beyond that. Things are moving too quickly. Bain talk about uh, point of departure and point of arrival. And when I've worked with them, we those certain phrases kind of stick as well. And just creating that vision of where do we want to be in 12 quarters time, and
mm,
working back from that. And what does that mean for this year? What does it mean? And trying to get beyond annual budgets and a 12-month calendar, but just getting to where we see ourselves. I mean, I've had my teams write the front page of a newspaper article, you know, uh, thinking thinking of 3 years in the past. What do you want to write about yourselves? What do you want the
mm.
market to write about you? Because visualization is a very powerful tool in transformation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the one thing that's often forgotten about when we talk transformation, people often lean into technology. They think it's a technology problem or situation. But actually, and maybe I'm a little bit biased in this, but it's a human capital thing. And there's a story someone shared with me a while back about how Kereta Api, the national rail provider in Indonesia, were tackling this. And because they're in a very diverse market where they're spanning not just Jakarta, but many tier three, tier four locations, they spent a whole 2 years before embarking on any transformation, just upskilling their people in these tier three, tier four cities in digital literacy. So they just invested money for 2 years, didn't move the needle, just built familiarity, built comfort, made them realize that, hey, this isn't a threat to your job. It's here to make your life easier. And only after 2 years did they start actually maneuvering and introducing these changes that you see now if you go through the railway stations here in Indonesia.
I mean, look, obviously, if you come up with any strategy or any major pivot for an organization, technology's got to play its part, but technology is the enabler, right?
Mm,
And maybe in some areas, technology is it. I mean, you can think of some industries where, clearly getting the technology right, maybe like further up the decision making tree. But generally, it's by having that sort of current state, desired state, uh, you know, point of departure, point of arrival articulation, it
mm,
will then sort of inform the tech stack. And maybe we're being not ambitious enough. Maybe we're trying to deliver capabilities too soon when there are building blocks that we need to put in place first and get some hygiene factors right before we fly. Um, you know, uh, and it's interesting the way I've heard it recently by um, a person that I really respect, Jimmy Allen at Bain. He sort of says, CEOs today they need to spend 50% of their time um, building the business, not and the other 50% of their time running the business. Right. So we really are in this phase of sort of, you know, building the plane as it's sort of taking off, right? So
mm,
and how, so when I talk to companies now, I'm like, well, how are you spending your time? Like, what does the cadence look like? Because if you're just on BAU, and the market is moving this fast, well, you have to change the whole operating rhythm. So it's the people, it's the strategy, it's the systems, and it's part of those systems is not just the technology we're adopting, it's the operating cadence.
Mm. Interesting, interesting. And I mean, does some of this span into private equity as well? Because you've worked with private equity backed businesses, and I hear stories about how working for private equity businesses is a bit of a disaster in terms of where things might end up. But then I know some have been successful and they brought companies together and come out even stronger. For you, what makes PE-led turnarounds succeed or fail?
Well, I worked for years with Bearings EQT, now more known as EQT, and they're amazing. They're amazing partners. Fantastic. Of course, they've got their own operating norms, and if you're going to be a PE portfolio CEO, you have to sort of, you expect that. There's a financial rigor.
Mm,
There's a set of best practices, maybe across that have been built up across 30, 40, 50, maybe 100 or hundreds of other companies in the portfolio. That's just going to make us better. Uh, as a company, and clearly, um, you know, private equity matches uh, funds funds from the investors with generally with some debt. The pay down of that debt is important, especially
mm,
important in these days with higher interest rates, right? So you've got to expect that there's going to be a focus not just on sales and profit, but a sales on operating cash flow as well. Maybe that
mm,
operating cash flow rigor. Hopefully it's not new, but in some cases it might be newer.
mm,
So the CFO and the capability of the finance team come under the spotlight a lot. But generally, if you can, partner with an accelerator of any sort that is going to push you a little bit harder, make you a world class operator, give you the right access to the right kind of tools, make you part of an operating portfolio family where you're all learning from each other. That can have a profound effect in terms of accelerating your business, and it also can give you the uh, the 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 courage to do what needs to be done. Because private
mm.
equity are thinking about a 10-year cycle.
Yeah.
5-year invest, 5-year divest, maybe shorter, depends on the fund, right? But they don't care if they don't really care what the financials look like in the next 12 months as long as you're doing the right things. So you're effectively keeping two P&Ls, right? You're keeping the actual P&L and you're keeping the underlying P&L. And in a retail context, getting out of problem stores, getting out of problem inventory is all helping you generate cash. You know,
Mm,
probably bringing down your P&L in the short term, but the right caliber of PE partner, they don't care. You're
mm,
creating future value. You're addressing your problems. You're scaling in the right way and leaving, parts of your business behind that, don't work. And you probably should have made those decisions earlier, but you were beholden to markets that judge you every 13 weeks, or a family that wants to be maybe too cautious, and so it can be a great galvanizer. I think the right private equity partners are like gold dust.
mm, mm. And I guess this rolls into some of your work as well, because you've served on many boards now. And in your opinion, what do the best boards do differently, Terry?
Well, I think first of all, you've got to make sure that the role of the chairman and the CEO are very clear, distinct, and separate. The chairman runs the board, the CEO runs the company, but the CEO is basically at the behest of the chairman and the board to basically align around strategy, customer operations, learning, development, core values, community standards, whatever those things are. And we've seen CEOs um, depart recently for not sort of taking the audit committee seriously enough, not taking the whistleblower whatever it is, right? So
Yeah.
you've got to make sure that the CEO doesn't have hubris, doesn't have too big an ego. They understand that we've all got stakeholders that we report to, and a board, if it's well populated, is there to amplify your knowledge, amplify your reach, um,
Mm,
mitigate risks by sort of shared responsibilities and shared accountabilities, and bring expertise. And so, clearly functioning committees of that board, whether it be strategy, whether it be the remuneration committee, whether it be nominating, audit, maybe sustainability, I mean, whatever, however the board, organizes its groups, you've got to make sure that they're well populated. The board have got to have, the right level of independence, the right level of courage, the right level of rigor. The management team has got to bring the right information. It's got to build trust with the board. It builds trust with the board through authentic conversations around, what's going well and what's not going well. And maybe the red lights are as important as the green lights, through
mm,
logic. The people that are on the management team are capable, they know what they're doing, and they're able to demonstrate to the board that they know what they're doing. And empathy. We treat the board as, standard bearers, but they're also friends. They're also human beings, and so we have to make sure that we invest in giving them, time with the executives of the company, the guided tour around the stores, the warehouse,
mm.
that we get together maybe once in a while socially, not too much, so that their independence is blurred in any way. But it's um, and so the standards required for the modern board, given AI, given the rapid change in technology, given public sentiment towards items that affect the planet, um, um, and the values that we therefore need to espouse. It's a high bar. It's not an easy. Those people who put their hand up to bring their expertise to bear on a listed company board in particular, I have full admiration for them.
Um, I mean, speaking of that, then, so for listeners who maybe are aspiring for board roles, whether that be, core members, whether it be like a non-executive director, focus, what path do you recommend?
I think you really have to understand the company's finances before you jump in. You really need to understand, um, you know, a bad sales quarter is not a disaster. A blip in margin is not a disaster, but
Mm,
a cash crisis is a disaster. And so, what's the situation with debt? What's the situation with borrowings? What could affect the headroom of the company? How do decisions get made in terms of capital spending, or any allocation of capital for that matter?
mm,
What are the sort of checks and balances that are in place? So generally, if you've got a company that manages its resources very well, very responsibly, and it's got highly capable people on the management team, you're in a safe, reasonably safe place. I mean, of course, they've got to have the right values and attributes as well. Might be good to just take a look at the last time they had a crisis. How did they deal with it? Were they transparent? Were they open? Were they quick? Did they
mm.
put their hands up and say mea culpa? This is how we're going to fix it. Um, because you don't want to be on a board where you are in any danger of personal reputational damage.
Yeah, fair. Um, I mean, moving along now and into last couple of questions, Terry, and wrapping things up. So, look, the reason we set up Career Candour as a podcast and wanted to go beyond the articles was because I think there's a lot of people out there that are hardworking, that are ambitious, but maybe don't have access to the right mentorship. Maybe parents aren't very hands-on. Maybe they read the headlines and all the doomsaying that's out there and think, I'm stuck where I am. So we wanted to bring stories like yours and others to the light because I think it's important, like you said about responsibility based on what we've been able to achieve. Let's share that with others and help others become successful too. So when people look back at your personal work and leadership, what's the legacy that you hope to leave behind, Terry?
Um, Look, I mean, I get my kicks from seeing the people that have worked for me, um, with me, uh, do well. right? Do
Mm,
well in the environment where I left, or do well in another environment, doesn't matter. I mean, ultimately, I think, have I enhanced that person's career? Have I enhanced what's in their toolkit? Have I enhanced their prospects? And as such, hopefully, the family life and
mm.
some of the lifestyle aspirations that they have as well. Although the choices that they make, I mean, ultimately, what I'm trying to do is basically just give people the right tools in the box. And so when I look at uh, at multiple management teams that I've had the pleasure to work with, generally
Mm,
speaking, the scorecard is pretty good. There are lots of my team members that have gone on to be CEOs of companies. Really, I was just thinking about this the other day. I mean, I don't think I don't think I would be exaggerating if I said there were sort of 12 to 15 CEOs,
okay.
that have sort of spawned off now, and that means that's a multiplier effect on their teams, on their companies, on their, because they clearly have the right, human centric leadership, because
Mm,
we've all worked together for so long, right? So, um, and then how are the businesses? You know, like, Courts UK is defunct. Court Southeast Asia is still thriving under Najima's leadership. That's great, right?
mm,
They're safe, and they've got a big Japanese parent, and and so ultimately, jobs are secure, and then equally, I look at um, the Matahari business, and that will continue to be a market leader for years to
mm,
come under the current leadership team, etc. Um, I look at the companies that I'm working with that are clients now, and generally they're all moving in the right direction.
mm,
So maybe legacy is too big a word. You just want to know that the people that you've touched along your journey,
mm.
hopefully are um, better off because of that relationship. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. And as a final question, I've asked this a few times now to others, and I normally say 25 as the threshold here, but by 25, you were already doing some pretty amazing things. So you might want to say 20, you might want to say 18, you pick the age. But the question is, if you could go back and could give 25-year-old Terry or 18-year-old Terry one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh, go to Asia earlier, maybe. Would be one. Um, I think, you know, when you think that something's the right thing to do, um, go for it earlier. Sometimes I've done things that they've worked out, but I had that thought 2 years earlier. And actually, in your 20s, whatever the age is, 21, 29, it doesn't matter. In your 20s, if you've got the benefit of a decent education behind you, if you've got um, a supportive family environment, whether that's parents or whether that's, in my case, I have a wife, Janice, who very comfortable with a basic life in Liverpool, right? That
Mm,
whole, you know, right. So we've got a fabulous life in Asia. Um, but if we dial back to the the life that we had, in our early 20s, it wasn't any less happy. And so
mm,
knowing that the worst case scenario is okay. So having those conversations with your partner, to say, if I take this new job and it doesn't go well, and we're back in this situation, is it okay?
mm,
Once you know that it's okay, you kind of got a risk, to a certain extent, you've got a lot of risk potential in your 20s, right?
mm,
So I just sort of say, take the risks, take the jump, take the leap, take it earlier, take it
mm,
when don't procrastinate until in your 30s, there's a bit more risk. In your 40s, there's a bit more risk. The risk gets higher. So just don't, if you've got something, if you've got an opportunity, don't wait. Jump in.
fantastic. Well, that's it for today's episode of Career Candour. A big thank you to Terry O'Connor for bringing not just his experience, but his honesty and clarity to the conversation. From leading through uncertainty to staying rooted in values, Terry's journey is a reminder that great careers aren't built overnight. They're built through grit, growth, and a whole lot of learning along the way. So, if you've enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who's figuring out their own path. You never know what part of someone's story could spark the next step in yours. Until next time, stay curious, stay candid, and keep building a career that feels true to you. Thanks again, Terry.
Thank you, Lou. It's a pleasure.